My name is Naomi, 38 years old, currently living in Virginia and working in national cybersecurity. To my colleagues, I'm the one holding the key to some of the government's most sensitive projects. But at my own family's dinner table, I was nothing more than a freeloader, just as my father declared out loud in front of relatives and guests. No one defended me. My younger brother raised his glass in agreement. My mother gave me a brief glance, then looked down as if that kind of humiliation was perfectly natural. That night, as I quietly left the dinner through the back parking lot of the restaurant, a man approached me without a sound and handed me a badge. It read, FBI. He said only one sentence, "Dear Naomi Pierce, urgent operation. We need you to lead." Have you ever been made to feel invisible by your own family, only to have the world suddenly look at you with different eyes? If that's something you've lived through, share it in the comments. And if this story speaks to you, like it, subscribe to the channel and stay with me. Because what happened next, you won't see coming. I remember that feeling vividly. That feeling when you accomplish something extraordinary, only to return home to blank stares and hollow small talk. I had just been awarded a federal honor for identifying a vulnerability that could have brought down the entire air traffic system on the East Coast. That day, as I stood under the stage lights, uniform pressed, citation in hand signed by the highest level of the Department of Defense, I turned to look at the family row in the audience. It was empty. My mother said she was busy hosting a party for Brandon to welcome potential investors. My father went golfing. And Brandon? He never once asked what I actually did in all of the last 20 years. His go-to line had always been, "Naomi's into some high-tech stuff. Way too complicated, don't even try to follow." In our family, I was the only one who chose research. Undergraduate scholarship to a doctorate in applied computing. But those degrees were never framed. They stayed in a cardboard box at the back of a cabinet, not kept for safekeeping, but hidden so they wouldn't outshine Brandon's glow. My brother was the one our parents called promising, charismatic, modern. I was the quiet one with the computers, too intense, hard to read. The way they said it, you'd think I was a flaw. I once told my mother about the time my team stopped a cyber attack on the nation's air traffic control system. A custom algorithm I'd built flagged the intrusion in under 4 seconds. I thought she'd be proud. I thought she'd ask how I did it, or at least ask if I was okay. But she simply sipped her tea and said, "That technical stuff. I don't get it. Don't bring up things that make people uncomfortable. Your brother can't follow it anyway." Then she asked if I wanted to help her prep chicken soup for the weekend party, as if the conversation hadn't just happened. They didn't dismiss me with yelling. They did it with silence. With indifferent eyes. With changing the subject every time I mentioned my work. When Brandon got nominated for a young leadership program at an investment firm, my father threw a party that night, invited nearly the whole neighborhood. When I was appointed to the National Strategic Advisory Board, with my name published in federal journals, no one in the family even mentioned it. That same evening, my mother asked me, "Naomi, did you do anything fun this week?" I said I'd been selected for the National Emergency Response Council. She nodded, turned to Brandon and said, "Honey, what color are you thinking for your new conference room?" "I think navy makes you look powerful." I didn't respond. I was used to it. But being used to something doesn't mean it stops hurting. The pain didn't come from them not knowing what I was capable of. It came from them knowing, and choosing to ignore it. As if acknowledging me would shake Brandon's golden child pedestal. I still remember the 20th anniversary ceremony at the agency where I work. I was chosen to speak in front of more than 200 staff and international guests. I used that speech to talk about silence. About those who work behind the scenes. No spotlight, no applause, but who form the backbone of our national defense. Afterward, a colleague shook my hand and said, "You just said what I've never dared to." I sent that speech video to my parents, hoping maybe they'd feel proud. Linda replied, "It was fine. But you should smile more. You looked stiff." And that's when I understood. To them, success wasn't about substance, it was about appearance. A woman, if she wasn't soft, radiant, socially smooth, would never be worthy of praise. I was everything they found difficult and unpresentable. 2 years ago, during a family gathering, a relative asked me, "What is it exactly that Naomi does in Washington?" I was just about to answer when my mother cut in, "Oh, something with computers, don't bother asking, it's a long story." Everyone laughed, poured more wine, and turned to Brandon to ask about his startup. I sat there silently, like a supporting character in the house I grew up in. Have you ever felt like you were quietly erased from the very story you gave your all to? Have you ever stepped into a room full of family and still felt like a ghost? So then you might understand why, when that man held out an FBI badge to me that night, I didn't feel fear. I felt relief. Because somewhere out there someone saw me. And more than that, they needed me. I've never been someone who lives for recognition. But like any human being, I want to be heard. And if my family won't hear me as their daughter, then they'll hear me another way, in a role they never saw coming. They brought me into a small room at the back of the bureau. No nameplate, no windows, just cool white light, a large monitor, and a wall-length code board. The lead agent, Mark Delaney, gave a quick intro. We need you to run a full audit on Atlas Tech's encryption layer. This is a defense integration firm prepping for a Pentagon contract. I nodded. The name Atlas Tech wasn't new. Brandon had just been promoted to Director of Strategic Development there barely 3 months ago. I'd heard whispers, but I never thought I'd end up sitting on the other side of the table. Mark pointed at a live code segment on screen. We found code snippets that are a 91% match to a classified algorithm previously registered in the Defense Department's internal system. But we haven't found the original developer's identity. I stepped closer, tilted my head at the first few lines. My heart dropped half a beat. That code was mine. A core component of an intrusion detection algorithm I'd written 7 years ago, back when I was still part of the Rapid Response Encryption Unit. No doubt about it. The variable names, the loop guard patterns, even the brief Latin annotations, they were all my fingerprint. I tapped the keyboard to expand the segment. The deeper I dug, the more familiar it became. Then came a modified section. Someone had added a new module. The addition used my structure but layered in a hidden secondary access path. The backdoor was subtle enough to dodge base-level scans, but it left behind a coded signature I instantly recognized. A timestamp. A half-scrambled IP address. And a username, B. Melton. I stood there for a moment still. Then I turned to Mark. I need the full archive of Atlas Tech's encryption logs, including deleted segments. He nodded, no questions asked, and signaled the tech team to assist. For the next 3 days, I practically lived inside the FBI's secure encryption lab. Files pulled from Atlas Tech's internal systems piled up like waves. I didn't eat there, but the coffee never stopped. I redrew flowcharts, analyzed access behavior, traced signatures embedded deep in the framework. And then one document popped up. The original blueprint for IR Vault. The system I had built during my early years at the National Defense Research Center. But now it appeared under a new name, Sentinel Echo. And the name on the submission? Brandon Melton. I froze. The document bore the Atlas Tech logo, and the submission date was from 12 months ago. I scrolled down to the fine print. There it was in faded type, based on early concept proposed by internal advisor, unreleased framework. No name. No registration code. No source citation. I remembered that year. A draft of IR Vault had gone missing during a data migration when my former agency restructured. I thought it had just been deleted. But apparently it wasn't. Someone had kept it. And that someone might have been sitting across from me at family dinners. I pulled up old emails. Found the one where I'd sent my draft home from an off-site device, hoping my parents would see what I'd been working on. Brandon had borrowed my computer that day to download a presentation deck. I hadn't thought twice. He was my brother. Who would have suspected? Now every detail clicked into place like the final piece of a game I never realized I was playing. Mark walked into the room, saw me staring at the screen. Did you find something? I printed out several pages of code and projected them onto the large screen. I don't need to verify anything else. I'm the one who wrote the original source code. But this version has been altered, exploited, and transferred without authorization. And the person who submitted it is my brother. Mark exhaled slowly. We can pursue this, but we'll need stronger legal proof. Is there a way you can definitively prove the original code belongs to you? I pulled a secure USB drive from my coat pocket, one with military-grade encryption. This is the original copy. It includes a timestamp and registered access key from the internal storage system at the Department of Defense. It's compressed and signed with a private encryption chain that only I possess. He took the drive and nodded. Then I think you know what you need to do next. I looked at the spinning Atlas Tech logo on the screen. The brother who once mocked me for being socially awkward was now running a platform built on the very foundation I created. And more than that, he was preparing to use it to defraud the government, manipulating a contract worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth to be restored. But before that could happen, they all had to see that no one gets to rewrite history without mentioning the one who started it. I wasn't sure what pulled me back into reviewing the legal documentation. Maybe it was instinct, maybe it was the gnawing feeling that something still wasn't right. Stolen code was one thing, but how had they dared to use it so openly as if they had rightful claim? One question kept circling in my mind. Who gave it legal standing? I requested access to Atlas Tech's internal partner contract system. It took nearly a full day to retrieve the official copy. When the document finally appeared on my screen, a chill ran down my spine. The contract, titled Confidential Technology Transfer, Voluntary, clearly stated that the original developer agreed to hand over all source code and intellectual property rights to Atlas Tech. The signature at the bottom? My Naomi Pierce. I stared at the familiar signature, scanned clean and crisp. It was definitely my handwriting. But I had never signed any contract for them. No one had even asked. I zoomed in on the bottom corner, where authentication metadata should have been. No verification number. No cryptographic key match. Just a simple timestamp, July 14, 2016. I froze. That July, I had been stationed in Colorado, participating in a classified military cybersecurity training program. I barely left the base and didn't sign any civilian paperwork during that entire month. But July 14th. I remembered that day clearly. It was my mother's birthday. I had sent her a card handwritten in black ink, my script soft and slanted slightly to the right like always. At the bottom of the card I had written a personal message and signed it in full. Naomi Pierce. A cold shiver ran up my neck. I pulled out my old personal file folder and opened the section where I stored old letters and cards. The card from 2016 was gone. I had never thrown it away. I tore through every folder, checked every corner. Still nothing. Then a memory struck with suffocating clarity. My mother, Linda, had once asked if she could keep the card as a keepsake, saying she loved the line I wrote at the end. I had nodded yes. A few weeks later, Brandon had come by to borrow some documents and brought along a handheld scanner. Said he needed to digitize images for a presentation. I didn't think twice. I was the only one in the house who took security seriously. My brother treated technology as a convenience, never a responsibility. And now I understood. That card had been used to steal my signature. They didn't just take my code. They forged my consent. I printed out the contract and used handwriting analysis software to cross-check. The results came back quickly. Elongated strokes at the beginning and end of characters. A common trait in signatures scanned and manipulated digitally. The listed witness on the contract? Mason Reed. My throat tightened at the name. Brandon's best friend, now CEO at Atlas Tech. My ex from college. The same man who once whispered to me, "You're smart, Naomi, but without someone to package your work, it'll never get picked up." I had believed him. I had handed him my dissertation draft for feedback. And later, fragments of my work mysteriously appeared in Brandon's presentation. Advised by Mason. I had never brought it up. Part shame, part resignation. I told myself, let it go, it's family. But this went beyond that. I requested access logs from the Office print system, a nuanced step most users overlook. In the archive, I found an entry from September 2016, originating from a backup server in Mason's office. Attached file, Naomi_card_skin_0714.png. I sat still for several minutes, not blinking. Every puzzle piece had just clicked into place. I submitted a full report to the Department of Defense's Legal Division, attaching all forgery evidence. Within the hour they responded, "You have the right to request a full hold on any contracts tied to the compromised source code. An independent investigation will follow. However, to pursue charges, we'll need one more clarification. Did your mother knowingly allow that card to be used for this purpose?" That question made me pause. I thought about my mother's gaze every time Brandon misspoke and she chose not to correct him. The way she silently watched me clear plates after dinner, never offering thanks. I didn't believe she orchestrated this. But she had handed over something that belonged to me without warning, without asking why. And sometimes silence is a form of complicity. I wasn't angry. That emotion had long passed. What remained was something sharper, cold clarity. I couldn't rewrite the past. But I could make sure they never repeated it. Not to me, not to anyone else. Because when people in power begin to believe consent is something they can fabricate, the entire system begins to rot from within. And I wasn't born to stand by and watch that happen. That evening, I received a dinner invitation from my mother. She said the family wanted to sit down together before the important day. The way she emphasized important made me suspicious. So I agreed. Part of me wanted to look them in the eye before the truth came out. And part of me needed to know how far they were still willing to go. Dinner was held at my parents' home, not a restaurant like usual. The living room was spotless, warm lighting overhead, scented candles centered on the table, as if all meant to soften the tension humming underneath. I arrived in a gray blouse, report folder in hand, the same file I'd be presenting the next day to the Department of Defense. Brandon was the first to stand and give me a hug. It was awkward, brief, and over before our shoulders even touched. "Glad you came," he said, eyes already shifting away. Mason wasn't there. I assumed they knew better than to bring him at this point. My father poured wine at the counter. He looked calm as always, composed. But his eyes betrayed unease. When I approached, he lowered his gaze. "Let's eat first," he said quietly. I nodded. Through dinner, Brandon dominated the conversation. He spoke of upcoming partnerships, the scale of their tech roadmap, and how crucial innovation was to national defense. I listened like an outsider. His tone wasn't that of a brother sharing dreams with his sister. It was rehearsed. A pitch. Or worse, manipulation. I realized they weren't seeking my opinion. They were staging a narrative as if I was the one who needed to adjust to fit the story they were selling. When dessert was served, my mother suddenly spoke. "Naomi, I heard you're presenting at the Department of Defense meeting tomorrow." Her voice was light, like she was asking whether I'd be bringing a coat. I set down my glass. "Yes. I'm delivering the opening address, at the request of the Joint Interagency Committee." She paused, then leaned slightly and gently placed a small envelope near my hand. I hadn't opened it yet, but I could already sense its familiarity. The thick paper, her usual perfume, the slanted script. "Naomi. You know," she began, smile fixed on her face, "Brandon's under a lot of pressure. This is a big moment for him. All eyes are on him. I just think, if you stepped back, let him shine, it would be better for everyone." I didn't respond. I simply reached for the envelope and began to open it slowly. Inside was a $100 gift card to a luxury spa downtown. Along with it, a small handwritten note that read, "Just let your brother shine. He's the face. You're the function." I looked at my mother. She avoided my gaze but kept a faint smile on her lips, as if what she had done was reasonable, polite, even kind. Brandon spoke, his voice slightly unsteady. "You get it, right? I mean, you're the real genius. No one's denying that. But sometimes the most talented person isn't the one who should be out front." I smirked, not a smile but the reflex of disappointment I couldn't quite control. My father set down his wine glass. "No one's denying your contribution, Naomi. But you know how these things go. Politics, partnerships, optics. Brandon fits that role better. You'll still be part of the success. Just not the person on center stage." I folded the envelope, carefully slid the note and gift card back inside, and tucked it into my coat pocket without saying a word. I had waited for someone, just one person in that room, to ask what I thought or what I wanted. No one did. After dinner, as I stood beside my car in the driveway, the cold wind brushed against my collar. I didn't rush. I called Mark Delaney, my voice low and precise. "I want to confirm, tomorrow morning I'm the first to present, right?" Mark's voice was firm. "Yes. Conference room 4. 8 o'clock. Do you have any special requests?" "I want all support materials fully prepped. Original code, intellectual property rights, forensic analysis logs. Everything. And I'll be the one standing at the podium. Not a supporting speaker. Not the note taker. A brief pause, then Mark replied, "Understood. We'll print a new nameplate accordingly." I ended the call and looked up at the night sky, shrouded in mist. In that moment I felt no anger. No bitterness. Only a sharp, undeniable clarity inside my chest, like a launch sequence had just activated. Tomorrow I wasn't just showing up for my work. I was showing up to reclaim my name. In a room where I had existed only in footnotes for years, I would now be the headline. And if they still chose not to see me, this time they wouldn't be able to look away. I arrived at the interagency headquarters just as the sun began to rise behind the eastern glass complexes, the light reflecting off the windows like cold blades. The parking lot was already full. Delegates from 3 federal agencies, 2 private sector firms, and 1 joint military task force were already in position. I stepped out of my car, straightened the crease of my uniform. My polished black shoes reflected clearly against the smooth concrete. I wore the full dress uniform of a lieutenant colonel with a commendation medal on my left chest. Silver trim marked my affiliation with the Joint Cybersecurity Division. A guard near the entrance saluted me, eyes widening slightly as he read the badge. "Colonel Naomi Pierce, Strategic Cyber Division." I nodded. "The meeting begins at 8 o'clock, correct?" "Yes, ma'am. They're expecting you in conference room 4. I walked down the main corridor. The door to room 4 was already open. The air inside was quiet, though the seats were nearly filled. Representatives from the Defense Technology Bureau, the Strategic Partnership Office, Atlas Tech executives, and several faces I recognized, some of whom had dismissed my proposals 3 years ago, now sat in higher-ranking positions. And in the far left corner near the presentation stand I saw Brandon. He was talking to Mason. Both wore dark navy suits and company name badges. Brandon hadn't noticed me yet, or maybe he simply didn't recognize me. I stood still for a moment, then moved toward the front table, reserved for speakers. A staff assistant looked at me, momentarily confused by the nameplate not yet updated. I opened my briefcase, pulled out my own badge, and set it on the table. It read clearly, "Colonel Naomi Pierce, Lead Advisor, Joint Cyber Operations." The air around me shifted slightly, like a subtle current passing through. Atlas Tech CEO Carl Bennett had just entered the room. His eyes passed over my table and he paused briefly upon seeing my name. But he said nothing, just nodded respectfully, then turned toward where Brandon was standing. A soft announcement came through the speakers, "Please take your seats. The session will begin in 3 minutes." Mason glanced my way for the first time. His face froze. Brandon turned instinctively. I watched the moment he hesitated. His mouth opened, eyes narrowed, then he quickly looked away, pretending to read a document. I didn't respond. I opened my tablet, reviewed the slide deck one final time. The demo clip was ready. The original source code, access chain charts, and encryption trace logs from 7 years ago. All backed up at 3 separate secure points and verified by the Department of Defense. A firm female voice announced, "We now invite the lead cybersecurity advisory group to present the opening session." I stood and walked to the podium. No murmurs. No tapping pens. The room fell completely silent, as if no one was quite sure what was about to happen. I launched the presentation. The first slide appeared, IR Vault Framework. Origin, Misuse, and Realignment. I looked across the audience. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Naomi Pierce, Strategic Advisor with the National Joint Cybersecurity Coordination Unit. Today I will present findings on the encryption framework currently integrated by Atlas Tech. Originally developed by myself and a team of engineers under the Department of Defense in 2016. I advanced to the next slide. A chart appeared, followed by a clip showing me in the original operations room, transmitting the base code via secure military channel. This clip is from Tier 2 encryption archive logs, verifying that I was the original sender of the source code, complete with timestamp, IP address, and digital signature. The recipient was Server Hub 7 at the Colorado Springs Military Data Center. I zoomed in on the code. When compared to the current framework integrated into Atlas Tech's product, branded Sentinel Echo, we identified a 91% structural match in command sequence, logic, and execution protocol. Even the internal Latin annotations remain intact. I paused for one breath. However, the current registered lead engineer on the Atlas Tech patent is Brandon Melton. I didn't need to look. I knew Brandon had dropped his head. Mason's jaw tightened, fingers tapping lightly on the table. I continued. We also retrieved the so-called voluntary transfer document, bearing a forged signature. The signature was extracted from a personal handwriting sample, specifically, a birthday card I wrote to my mother. The falsified contract was authorized by Atlas Tech CEO Mr. Mason Reed. All eyes shifted immediately to Mason. He attempted a weak smile, but his facial muscles betrayed him. He leaned toward the CEO, whispered something, then closed his laptop. Without waiting for permission, he stood and said clearly into the microphone, "I respectfully withdraw from this session for personal reasons." No one stopped him. I turned back to the screen. Conclusion. The current encryption framework has been used without authorization, in violation of intellectual property agreements, with clear evidence of intent to conceal origin for financial gain. 1 second later, the complete set of validation documents appeared. Digital certificates, timestamps, and my name listed as the original project lead. Silence. But not the silence of doubt. The silence of confirmation. I looked toward Carl Bennett, who was reading the final portion of the report with careful attention. Then I closed my tablet, nodded slightly. Thank you for your time. I'm ready to take questions and coordinate corrective action, both with the corporate partners and the federal agencies, to restore legal integrity to this case. I stepped down from the podium. No one in the room had moved yet, but the way they looked at me had changed. No one would ever erase my name from the record again. Not with words. Not with money. Not with a gift card slipped quietly behind someone's back. And if they tried, I would return, with evidence, with truth, and with the full weight of the system behind me. As I walked away, the air in the room still felt like thick glass. No one spoke right away. A few exchanged glances. Some lowered their heads to their notebooks as if rereading what they'd just heard, to confirm it had really happened. I hadn't even reached my seat when a chair slid. The quiet scrape of wood against floor echoed across the room. My father stood up. At first he didn't look at me. He looked at his clenched hands. His voice came out dry. We really didn't know it was like this. I didn't turn around. I stood still, shoulders straight. Not out of pride, but because I'd heard words like that my whole life. And they always came, too late. I turned to face him. My eyes met his directly. No. You didn't ask. There was no anger in my voice, just the tone of someone who had learned to live inside silence. My father tilted his head, opened his mouth as if to say something else, then stood there, like the last actor on stage after the curtain had fallen. I returned to my seat and placed the file folder on the table. A soft cough came from the front of the room. Atlas Tech's CEO, Carl Bennett, stood up, smoothing his jacket like he was about to make a statement he couldn't take back. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice low but commanding, "I'd like to formally announce a decision made by the executive board during an emergency session this morning, after receiving full documentation and legal review from the Department of Defense." He turned toward me. "Colonel Pierce, we officially offer you the position of Senior Strategic Advisor to the Atlas Tech Executive Board, effective immediately with a 4-year term." A quiet murmur spread across the room, like ripples on a still lake. I looked at him for a moment, then nodded without speaking. He continued, "We have also prepared a supplementary contract, which includes federal-level intellectual property protection and provisions to prosecute any past or future misuse of proprietary technical assets. If you agree, our legal team is ready to tailor the terms to your specifications." I accepted the thick stack of documents and placed it gently on the table in front of me. I could feel not just the weight of the paper, but the weight of the years I had been shut out, and now the fact that I was being asked back in, but this time on my terms. Brandon remained in the corner of the room, silent. He hadn't spoken a word since my presentation. His hands rested on his knees, a green vein rising along the side of his neck. Carl turned to him. "Brandon," he said, his tone harder now, "the board has unanimously agreed that until this matter is fully investigated, you are to be suspended from all roles within Atlas Tech, effective immediately." Brandon's face collapsed. His eyes darted toward me, looking for something to hold on to. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "We're family." I tilted my head slightly, not with anger, but with the kind of emptiness you learn to wear like armor. When you used my signature, what did you think we were? He said nothing. After a pause, he whispered, I didn't think it would go this far. No, I replied, you just thought I'd stay silent like always. No one defended Brandon. There were no more polite smiles around the table. Those who had once laughed, once played along, now lowered their heads, scribbled into notebooks, or tapped softly at their phones. Not because they felt sorry for me, but because they had just watched a system they thought they controlled shift in front of their eyes. Carl turned to me again, voice steadier now. We also propose a formal press release to update the public record, restoring your name to the original development team of Sentinel Echo, and formally acknowledging the IR Vault framework as your creation. I gave a small nod, emotionless. I didn't need a press release to save their face. I needed the correction documented in black and white, so no one could erase me again. At the far end of the room, my father was still standing. His face no longer carried the confidence of someone who thought he knew everything. He walked slowly toward me, his eyes dulled beneath the overhead lights. Naomi, he said softly, like we were alone. I didn't know you'd come this far. I cut him off, my tone gentle but firm. There's nothing more you need to say. It's all here now. I pointed to the contract, the verified signature, the time-stamped encryption records. He fell quiet, then nodded faintly. No excuse could survive the clarity of truth when it's laid bare, sharp as a blade against years of indifference. I didn't wait for the meeting to end. I closed the folder, stood up, bowed slightly to the panel, and walked out. I didn't look back. I didn't need anyone to stop me. Down the hallway, I passed a large mirror mounted between glass panel walls. The reflection staring back wasn't the girl who was once called a freeloader at the family table. It was a woman walking in full legitimacy, entirely on her own terms. I wasn't used to standing in front of cameras, much less under harsh white lights that forced every detail of my uniform to be perfectly adjusted to the last millimeter. But that morning, inside the Department of Defense's internal photo room, I stood still as instructed, back straight, eyes forward, the American flag spread wide behind me like a tapestry of silent sacrifice. The photographer, an older woman named Meredith with gray hair and steady hands, lowered her camera after each shot and thanked me quietly. You're the first person I've photographed who didn't need an angle adjusted, she said, her voice as soft as fabric brushing together. I smiled gently, not answering. A smile just enough to keep composed, just enough to mask the thing welling quietly in my eyes. It had been a month since that meeting. In that short time, my life had changed almost completely. Not because I was suddenly celebrated, but because I no longer had to hide my name. The article was published in the opening week of the month by the distinguished defense magazine Faces Behind the Firewall. The cover story title was simple: The Architect Who Chose Silence Until It Mattered. In the photo, I stood tall, not turned away, not obscured by anyone. Below was a small caption, unembellished but unmistakable: Colonel Naomi Pierce, Strategic Lead, National Cyber Defense Integration. What surprised me wasn't the article. It was the handwritten letter from the editor. We honestly didn't think your photo would be marketable enough for a cover. No flashy angle. But when we read the report you presented, everyone in our office said the same thing. This is the kind of person people need to know. At the new headquarters of the Joint Cybersecurity Coordination Center, where I'd just been named Permanent Strategic Advisor, they unveiled a commemorative wall in the main atrium. It was a gray glass installation over 7 feet tall, reflecting morning light like a silent greeting. On it were portraits of individuals who had been foundational to critical programs the public would never hear about. My photo was centered in landscape. No gold frame. No spotlight. Just a single line engraved beneath the glass. She wasn't missing, she was just never seen. I stood before that glass on the morning of the unveiling. There were no media cameras, no need for speeches. The only person who approached me was a young employee, a woman around 25 with her hair tied back, name badge reading R. Morales. She stared at the photo for a long moment, then turned to me, hesitant. Were you ever scared? She asked. I looked at her for a moment, saw something in her eyes I remembered from my 20s. A flame still flickering but never extinguished. I didn't answer right away. I looked up at the glass wall, then finally turned back to her. I used to, I said without hiding it. I was afraid I wasn't good enough. Afraid of being forgotten. afraid that if I stopped trying for even a minute, the world would prove I was exactly what they thought, a spare part. She swallowed hard, like the words had struck something deep inside. I continued, softer now. But then I chose not to run from fear. I learned to stand beside it. Let it follow me like a shadow. Not to avoid it, but to remind myself that every step still mattered. She nodded silently. I didn't need her to thank me or feel moved. I just needed her to understand. We don't have to wait for someone else to validate our worth. As I turned away, I caught my reflection faintly blended into the light shining off the memorial wall. Not loud, not flashy, but no longer erased. That same week, I was invited to 3 strategic forums, 2 tech advisory panels, and 1 emergency response simulation hosted by the Alliance. Every invitation listed my name, complete, spelled correctly with no one else's title beside it. Sometimes all I had to do was show up, observe, then quietly leave. No one needed me to prove anything anymore. At the end of Friday, after most people had left the building, I stayed in my office to revise sections of a contingency report. The lights had dimmed. Down the hallway, the only sound was the hum of the automatic coffee machine. I opened a small drawer and pulled out an old photo, the only one I'd kept from high school. It was taken in the backyard, me and Brandon. I never displayed it. But I never threw it away either. I looked at it for a moment, then neatly slid it beneath the newly signed contract with the department. As I stepped into the hallway, Morales appeared at the far end, returning to grab something she'd forgotten. She spotted me and blinked. "You're still here." I smiled. "I'm used to working late." "Do you always work this quietly?" I paused, then answered softly, "Silence doesn't mean I have nothing to say. It means I used to live in a place where, no matter how loud I spoke, they never listened." She nodded slowly, then smiled, lightly, like someone who had just understood something without needing it explained. We walked side by side toward the elevator. When the doors opened, the light inside cast across my face clearly. I saw my reflection in the stainless steel panel. No longer someone seeking approval, just someone intent on holding the boundary between herself and the things she chose to protect. That afternoon, I was washing dishes in my small kitchen when I heard a knock at the door. 3 taps. Even. Unhurried. Neither timid nor demanding. I dried my hands with a towel and walked out, not bothering to check the peephole. When I opened the door, 3 familiar faces stood before me. My father, my mother, and Brandon. Lined up as if they'd practiced their posture ahead of time. Linda held a dark wood picture frame, wrapped in ash-gray linen. Brandon carried nothing. His hands were tucked into the pockets of a jacket pressed so crisply it might have been brand new. And my father, he brought nothing either. Just stood slightly tilted toward my mother, as if to avoid locking eyes with me too long. I said nothing. Neither did they. Then Linda slowly extended the frame toward me, her hand trembling slightly. I looked down and unwrapped the linen. My heart skipped. It was the photo taken at my doctoral graduation, the one they once said was too stiff to hang, too formal, too cold, too out of place for the house's style. I remembered asking my mother if I could send it home for safekeeping. She'd replied, "You should probably keep it. Might need it for job applications later." Now the photo had been carefully framed behind anti-glare glass. In it, I wore a black academic gown, diploma in hand, eyes turned slightly, not looking at the camera the way people do when they never expect to be kept in the frame. Linda looked up. Her eyes had turned red at some point. This time, "Can we hang it?" Her voice was soft, hoarse, and there was something slow in her breath, like she'd been holding that sentence in the whole ride over. I looked toward my father. He didn't speak. Just nodded. Brandon stayed quiet too. His head lowered, but his eyes met mine clearly, no longer evasive. I didn't answer right away. But I opened the door wider and stepped aside. "Come in. I made too much for dinner." My mother walked past me first, then my father. Brandon was last. As he passed my shoulder, he didn't touch me, didn't speak, but I saw his shoulders drop slightly, like someone who had just set down a weight they'd carried too long. We sat around the oak dining table in a small but warm kitchen. No one spoke much at first. I ladled soup into bowls and placed them in front of them the way I used to when we all lived in the same house. Though back then no one ever really noticed. They bowed their heads and said, "Thank you." A new habit, I guessed. I didn't correct them. I let them learn to sit with my presence without trimming me down to a background role. Dinner passed slowly, quietly. My father finished his soup and dabbed his mouth with a cloth napkin as always. My mother told a wandering story about an old friend who just moved to the suburbs. It felt disjointed but not fake. Brandon was the quietest of all. He nodded when asked, smiled when looked at, and stayed silent when no one said his name. When dessert was served, my father placed his spoon down and folded his hands. He looked at me, not pleading, not begging. I used to think, it didn't matter how good you were as long as you knew when to step back. I was wrong. I looked at him for a moment, not to answer but to see if I still felt angry. I didn't. Not anymore. Only an empty space being quietly filled by something I couldn't yet name. Linda sat beside him, still holding the photo in her lap. She lifted it and placed it gently on the table between us. Naomi, this picture sat in our drawer for 6 years. Not because we didn't see its value, but maybe because we didn't fully see you. I looked at her, for the first time in months, maybe the first time since childhood, and saw something real in her eyes. Not pity. Not shame. Recognition. And sometimes, a single nod can be the deepest apology. Brandon placed his hand on the table and spoke softly. You once said silence isn't always surrender. I get that now, late, but I do. I didn't respond right away. I stood, walked to the empty wall near the bookshelf. From a drawer I took out a small nail and a hammer. No one spoke as I tapped the nail into place and hung the photo, centered between the two shelves, right at eye level as you entered the room. When I turned back, all three were still seated, eyes fixed on the picture, not pretending, not lowering their heads. I sat down again. No need to say more. They were here, not to fix me, not to lead, not to claim. Just to sit and listen. A small thing that can change an entire life. That night after they left, I sat alone at my desk, the apartment lit by soft yellow light. The photo we had just hung still sat on the wall behind me, like a steady breath marking something that had finally been placed where it belonged. I opened my laptop and logged into the private inbox set up by the Department for Mentoring Advisors. A new message had arrived. The subject line was simple. My name is Madison. I'm a senior studying computer engineering in Wisconsin. I just wanted to ask, if one day I feel invisible, what should I do to not disappear? I didn't know why that email made me pause for so long. Maybe because I had once been Madison. Sitting in a freezing library at 10 p.m., hands trembling as I wondered if my name had been left off the research group by mistake. Quietly deleting a celebratory post because no one in my family liked or commented on it. Wondering if I was overreacting. Wondering if their silence was something I just had to learn to live with. I opened a blank document and typed the first line, Dear Madison. Then I paused, took a deep breath. There will be silences in your life when you'll feel like you're speaking into a void. You'll submit reports and hear nothing back. Write the cleanest lines of code and no one will test them. Sit in meetings where no one asks your opinion. And then you'll start to wonder, do I even exist? I typed slowly, each word pulled from a place long asleep inside me. You know, Madison, their silence doesn't reflect your worth. It's just a gap they haven't yet learned how to fill with recognition. And that is not your fault. I remembered a late night in the RD unit when I had just completed the first version of IR Vault. I sat there, alone in a room lit by the blinking lights of server racks and thought, if someone sees this tomorrow, that would be nice. But no one did. So I kept going. Not for anyone. But because I believed what I was building was real. You don't need someone to give you permission to exist. You don't need a nod to validate your work. The only thing you need is to continue. I paused again, looking at the words on screen. A light breeze slipped through the window, brushing the back of my neck, and though I shivered slightly, I didn't feel cold. I kept writing. Maybe one day you'll be invited on stage, a spotlight on your face, applause all around you. Or maybe not. And that doesn't lessen your value. What truly matters is, you will still choose to do what's right even in the dark. A soft ping signaled a new email, but I didn't check it. I was still in the middle of a thought that needed to be written all the way through. I used to think, maybe I had to wait until someone called my name before I could step into the light. But now I know, sometimes the first step has to come from yourself. Not to be seen, but to remind yourself you never disappeared. I remembered the first words my mother said after dinner. Can we hang your photo now? 6 simple words. But they came after 3 decades of waiting. They came when I no longer needed permission. And for that reason they didn't hurt anymore. I typed the final line. Don't ever let their silence make you question your own truth. Then I signed, Naomi Pierce. I saved the email as a draft, planning to send it in the morning when my mind was clearer. But I knew, every word I had written tonight was true. On my screen, I reopened the presentation I had used during the interagency meeting. The last slide still held the line I had written that morning. A single sentence, not bolded, not dramatized, but resting there like a steady breath. Respect hits different when you no longer seek it, you carry it. I left the screen glowing, its light reflecting on the wall. Then I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window, where the city lights pulsed like the quiet heartbeat of someone learning to believe in themselves again. If you've listened this far, maybe somewhere in my story you saw a piece of your own. Maybe you were once overlooked in the very house you grew up in. Maybe you did something extraordinary in silence and no one noticed. Or maybe you're still sitting in the dark, wondering when someone will finally acknowledge you. I don't have the answers to everything. But I know this: real worth doesn't need polish. It just needs to be lived honestly. And respect, once it stops being something you chase, comes to you in ways deeper than you imagined. What about you? Have you ever felt left out even though you knew how hard you tried? Have you ever chosen silence, or chosen to stand up and speak? Share it below. I'll read every word. And if this story touched something in you, follow the channel so you won't miss the next ones. Stories of family, honor, trust, and the moments when someone who seemed invisible finally steps out and rewrites their own story.